One professional text about an unpaid invoice got me arrested overnight. By morning, I was in a jail cell, and I had no idea how it happened. My name is Alex, I'm 29 years old, and I spent a night in jail because of a single text message that was completely misunderstood. The experience was terrifying, humiliating, and completely surreal, and it taught me some harsh lessons about how easily communication can be twisted and how vulnerable we all are to misinterpretation in the digital age. To understand how one innocent message led to my arrest, I need to explain the context of what was happening in my life at that time. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means I interact with a lot of different clients on various projects. About a year ago, I was hired by a small marketing agency to create branding materials for one of their clients. The project manager I worked with was a woman named Claire, and we had a good professional relationship. She was clear about what she needed, gave constructive feedback, and paid promptly. We exchanged probably hundreds of emails and messages over the course of several projects, always professional and focused on work. After about 6 months of working together on various projects, Claire left the marketing agency to start her own consulting business. She reached out to let me know about her transition and asked if I'd be interested in continuing to work with her on freelance projects for her new venture. I said absolutely, and we continued our professional relationship. She'd send me design requests, I'd complete the work, invoice her, and get paid. It was a straightforward, mutually beneficial business arrangement. Claire was married, which I knew because she'd occasionally mention her husband in passing during our work conversations. She'd say things like her husband was helping her set up the office for her new business, or that they were going on vacation so she'd be unavailable for a few days. It was the kind of casual personal information that naturally comes up in professional relationships, and I never thought anything of it. I was also in a relationship with my girlfriend Emma, who I'd been dating for about 2 years. The situation that led to my arrest started innocuously enough. Claire had hired me to design a logo and marketing materials for a new client she'd landed. It was a rush job with a tight deadline because her client needed everything ready for a product launch. I worked late nights and weekends to get everything done on time, and Claire was very appreciative of the effort. When I delivered the final files, she sent me a message saying the client loved everything and that she'd be recommending me for future projects. A few days later, I sent her an invoice for the work. This is where things started to go wrong, though I didn't know it at the time. I didn't receive the usual prompt payment. After about 2 weeks, which was longer than normal, I sent a polite follow-up message asking about the status of the invoice. Claire responded apologizing and saying she'd been dealing with some personal issues but would get the payment processed soon. Another week went by with no payment. I sent another follow-up, a bit more direct this time, explaining that I had bills to pay and really needed to receive payment for the completed work. Claire responded again, this time sounding more stressed, saying that she was going through a difficult time and asked if I could please be patient. She didn't elaborate on what the difficult time was, and I didn't ask because it wasn't my business. But here's the thing about being a freelancer, when clients don't pay you, it directly impacts your ability to pay your own bills. I wasn't being unreasonable or aggressive, I was simply trying to collect payment for work I'd already completed. After another week with no payment and no substantive communication from Claire, I decided I needed to be more firm. I sent her a message that said something like this: Claire, I understand you're going through a difficult time, but I've completed the work you requested and I need to be paid. The invoice is now a month overdue. If I don't receive payment by the end of this week, I'll need to pursue other options to collect what I'm owed. I hope we can resolve this without it coming to that. In my mind, this was a perfectly reasonable business message. I was being clear about my expectations, giving her a deadline, and indicating that there would be consequences if payment wasn't made. The other options I was referring to were things like filing a small claims court case or reporting her to collections, which are standard remedies when clients don't pay. I sent that message on a Tuesday afternoon and didn't think much more about it. I went about my day, worked on other projects, had dinner with Emma, and went to bed that night with no indication that anything was wrong. The next morning, Wednesday, I was sleeping in a bit because I'd worked late the night before. I was awakened around 8 in the morning by loud, aggressive knocking on my apartment door. Still half asleep, I stumbled to the door and looked through the peephole. There were 2 police officers standing in the hallway. My first thought was that something had happened to someone I knew and they were there to notify me. I opened the door, and before I could even say good morning, one of the officers asked if I was Alex Morrison. When I confirmed my identity, he told me I was under arrest for criminal harassment. I was completely confused. I asked what they were talking about, and the officer said that a complaint had been filed against me for sending threatening and harassing messages. He asked me to turn around and put my hands behind my back. I was being handcuffed in my own doorway, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, with no idea what was happening or why. The officers brought me down to my building's lobby in handcuffs, which was absolutely humiliating because several of my neighbors saw me being escorted out by police. They put me in the back of a police car and drove me to the station. During the drive, I kept asking what this was about and who had filed a complaint, but the officers said they couldn't discuss details and that I'd be able to talk to a detective at the station. At the police station, I was processed like a criminal. They took my fingerprints, my photograph, and put me in a holding cell. I was allowed one phone call, which I used to call Emma. She was shocked and confused, and I told her as much as I knew, which wasn't much. I asked her to try to find me a lawyer. Then I sat in that cell for hours, absolutely terrified and bewildered about what was happening to me. Finally, late in the afternoon, I was brought into an interrogation room where a detective was waiting. He introduced himself as Detective Ramirez and explained that Claire had filed a police report claiming that I'd been harassing her for weeks and had sent her threatening messages. He showed me printouts of several messages I'd sent to Claire, including the most recent one about pursuing other options if she didn't pay me. I explained that these were business messages about an overdue invoice for work I'd completed. I told him about our professional relationship, about the project I'd done for her, and about how she owed me money. Detective Ramirez listened but didn't seem particularly sympathetic. He said that regardless of the business context, the messages could be interpreted as threatening and that Claire had claimed she felt harassed and frightened by my communications. I was floored. Frightened? Of what? I'd sent her professional messages about payment for completed work. I asked to see the police report or whatever Claire had said to justify having me arrested. Detective Ramirez said that Claire had claimed I'd become obsessed with her, that I'd been sending her unwanted messages constantly, and that my most recent message threatening other options had made her fear for her safety. This was insane. I pulled up my phone, which thankfully the police had allowed me to keep with me though they'd examined it, and showed Detective Ramirez the full message history between Claire and me. I showed him months of professional communications about work projects. I showed him the timeline of my payment follow-ups, which consisted of maybe 4 or 5 messages over the course of a month. I showed him that there was nothing obsessive, nothing inappropriate, nothing that could reasonably be interpreted as harassment. Detective Ramirez looked through the messages, and I could see his expression starting to change. He asked me if I had any documentation of the work I'd done for Claire and the invoice I was trying to collect on. I said yes, absolutely, and offered to provide whatever documentation he needed. He said he'd need to verify some things and left me sitting in the interrogation room for another hour. When he came back, his demeanor had shifted considerably. He said that he'd spoken with his supervisor and that they were going to release me, but that the charges hadn't been formally dropped yet. He explained that the district attorney would need to review the case and make a determination about whether to proceed with prosecution. He said I should get a lawyer and that I'd be notified about a court date if charges were filed. I was released that evening after spending almost 12 hours in custody. Emma picked me up from the station, and I was emotionally and physically exhausted. I felt violated, humiliated, and angry. I'd been arrested, fingerprinted, photographed, and held in a cell all because of a business dispute that Claire had apparently decided to handle by falsely accusing me of harassment. The next day, still shaken from the experience, I contacted a criminal defense attorney named Robert Chen who specialized in cases like this. I explained everything that had happened, provided him with all my documentation, and asked what I should do. Robert was reassuring but also realistic. He said that even though it seemed clear I hadn't done anything wrong, false accusations could still result in prosecution if the district attorney's office decided to move forward. Robert requested all the police reports and documentation related to my arrest. When we reviewed everything together, a disturbing picture emerged. Claire's statement to the police had been highly exaggerated and in some cases outright false. She'd claimed I'd been sending her messages, constantly, when in reality I'd sent maybe one message every week or so over a month-long period. She'd claimed the messages were obsessive and personal, when they were clearly about business and payment. Most troublingly, she'd claimed that my message about pursuing other options was a veiled threat of physical harm. She told police she interpreted it as me threatening to come to her home or workplace to confront her. This interpretation was absurd given the context, but Claire had apparently been convincing enough in her fear and distress that the police took her complaint seriously. Robert said we needed to understand why Claire had done this. He suggested that there might be more to her personal situation that was relevant. He hired a private investigator to look into Claire's circumstances, which felt strange and invasive but was apparently necessary to build my defense. What the investigator found was illuminating. Claire was indeed going through a difficult personal time, but it had nothing to do with me. She was in the process of getting divorced from her husband. The divorce was apparently contentious, involving disputes over money and business assets. Claire's new consulting business, the one she'd hired me to do work for, was part of the marital property dispute. The investigator also found that Claire had significant financial problems. She was behind on rent for her office space, had maxed out several credit cards, and had multiple other unpaid invoices from various vendors and contractors. I wasn't the only person she owed money to. She was essentially insolvent and unable to pay her debts. Robert theorized that Claire had filed the harassment complaint as a way to avoid paying me. If I was criminally charged with harassing her, it would be much harder for me to pursue civil remedies to collect the money she owed. It might even give her grounds to claim that any debt to me was invalid because it arose from a business relationship with someone who was harassing her. It was a cynical and manipulative strategy, but Robert said he'd seen similar tactics before. Armed with this information, Robert reached out to the district attorney's office before they made a decision about whether to file charges. He provided them with all of our documentation showing the legitimate business relationship, the clear context of the messages as payment follow-ups, and information about Claire's financial situation and divorce that suggested a motive for false reporting. The assistant district attorney assigned to review the case was a woman named Lisa Hartman. Robert said that Lisa had a reputation for being thorough and fair, which was good news for me. She agreed to meet with us before making a charging decision, which Robert said was a positive sign that she was taking our evidence seriously. In the meeting with Lisa, I explained everything from my perspective. I showed her the full context of my professional relationship with Claire, the work I'd done, the invoice that was owed, and the completely reasonable nature of my payment follow-up messages. Robert presented the information about Claire's financial situation and suggested that the harassment complaint was retaliatory and false. Lisa listened carefully and asked pointed questions. She wanted to know if I'd ever contacted Claire outside of the normal business channels we'd been using. I said no, I'd only ever messaged her through the same platform we'd always used for work communication. She asked if I'd ever shown up at Claire's home or workplace. Again, no, I'd never even met Claire in person since all our work had been done remotely. She asked if there was any personal element to our relationship that might explain Claire's reaction. Absolutely not, it was purely professional. After about an hour of questioning, Lisa said she needed a few days to review everything thoroughly but that based on what she'd seen so far, she was inclined not to file charges. She said it appeared that this was a civil business dispute that Claire had inappropriately escalated by filing a false police report. She couldn't promise anything definitive but suggested that I probably didn't need to worry about prosecution. A week later, Robert received official notification that the district attorney's office was declining to file charges. The case was closed. I was relieved beyond words, but I was also still dealing with the trauma of having been arrested and the very real consequences that arrest had on my life even though I was never charged with a crime. The arrest showed up on background checks, which created problems when I applied for new client contracts. I had to explain to potential clients that yes, I'd been arrested, but no, I wasn't charged, and the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Some clients were understanding, others were not. I lost out on several good opportunities because companies didn't want to take a chance on someone with an arrest record, regardless of the outcome. My relationship with Emma was also strained by the experience. She believed me and supported me throughout, but the stress and anxiety of the situation put pressure on us. I was irritable and withdrawn for weeks after the arrest, dealing with depression and anxiety that I'd never experienced before. Emma was patient, but I know it wasn't easy for her. Robert advised me that I had grounds to pursue legal action against Claire for filing a false police report and for malicious prosecution. I could potentially sue her for damages including lost income, legal fees, and emotional distress. I seriously considered it, but ultimately decided against it for several reasons. First, Claire was apparently broke and going through a messy divorce. Even if I won a judgment against her, collecting on it would be difficult or impossible. Second, pursuing a lawsuit would mean more time, money, and emotional energy devoted to this situation when I really just wanted to move on. Third, Robert warned me that lawsuits can be unpredictable and that Claire might countersue or make additional false allegations that would drag things out even further. Instead, I decided to focus on rebuilding my life and my business. I wrote off the money Claire owed me as a loss, an expensive lesson in the importance of getting deposits up front and having clear payment terms in contracts. I started being much more careful about who I worked with and how I structured my business relationships. I also filed a complaint with the police department about how my case had been handled. I felt that the officers who arrested me had taken Claire's word at face value without doing even basic investigation into whether her claims made sense. If they'd looked at the message history or asked me for my side of the story before arresting me, the whole situation might have been avoided. The police department's internal affairs division reviewed my complaint but ultimately found that the officers had acted appropriately based on the information Claire provided. This was frustrating but not surprising. The system is set up to take accusations seriously, especially accusations of harassment or threats, and that means sometimes innocent people get caught up in it. About 3 months after the charges were declined, I received an unexpected message. It was from Claire's soon-to-be ex-husband, a man named David. He'd somehow found my contact information and wanted to talk to me. I was immediately suspicious and consulted with Robert before responding. Robert advised caution but said that hearing what David had to say might be informative. I agreed to speak with David on the phone. He apologized for what Claire had put me through and explained that he'd only recently learned about the harassment complaint she'd filed against me. He said that Claire had been behaving erratically throughout their divorce, making false accusations against various people, and that he wanted me to know that he didn't believe I'd done anything wrong. David also revealed something that made Claire's actions make more sense, though not more forgivable. Apparently, Claire had a history of mental health issues including anxiety and paranoia that had gotten worse under the stress of the divorce. She'd stopped taking her medication and was not thinking clearly. David said he wasn't making excuses for her behavior, but he thought I should understand that her actions might have been influenced by untreated mental illness. This information gave me some compassion for Claire, but it didn't change what she'd done to me or the consequences I'd suffered. Mental illness might explain her behavior, but it didn't erase my trauma or fix the damage to my reputation and livelihood. I thanked David for reaching out and ended the conversation. Looking back now, almost a year after my arrest, I can see the experience as a turning point in my life. It was traumatic and unjust, but it taught me important lessons about protecting myself professionally, about the power of documentation, and about how quickly things can spiral out of control when someone decides to weaponize the legal system against you. I learned to always get detailed contracts for every project, no matter how well I know the client. I learned to require deposits up front and to have clear payment terms with consequences spelled out. I learned to document every communication and to be extremely careful about how I word things, especially when there's any kind of dispute or conflict. I also learned about the flaws in our criminal justice system. The fact that I could be arrested and held for 12 hours based solely on someone's false accusations, with no investigation into whether those accusations made sense, is deeply troubling. I was lucky that I had documentation to prove my innocence and that I could afford a good lawyer. Not everyone in my situation would be so fortunate. The arrest record still haunts me sometimes. Even though I was never charged, the fact that I was arrested shows up on certain background checks. I've gotten better at explaining the situation when it comes up, but it's always awkward and sometimes costly in terms of lost opportunities. There's a permanent digital footprint of one of the worst experiences of my life, accessible to anyone who searches for it. My advice to anyone in a similar situation would be to document everything, get a lawyer immediately, and don't assume that common sense or obvious innocence will protect you. The system doesn't always work the way it should, and you need to be prepared to advocate for yourself aggressively. Also, be very careful about how you communicate with people, especially in writing. Messages that seem perfectly innocent to you can be twisted and misinterpreted by someone with malicious intent. I was arrested for harassment after sending one message about collecting payment I was owed. That message wasn't threatening, it wasn't harassing, it was a legitimate business communication. But in the hands of someone who wanted to avoid paying her debts and who was dealing with her own personal crisis, that message became a weapon used against me. The fact that the truth eventually came out and charges weren't filed doesn't change the fact that I was arrested, fingerprinted, and held in a cell like a criminal. The experience changed me. I'm more cautious now, more cynical about people's motives, and more aware of how vulnerable we all are to false accusations in a world where digital communications can be screenshot, shared, and used as evidence regardless of context. I'm grateful that my ordeal ended relatively well, but I'm also mindful that it could have gone very differently. And I carry that awareness with me every day as I navigate professional relationships and try to rebuild the trust and reputation that one false accusation nearly destroyed.